Good evening. In a world that often feels like it's spinning faster than we can keep up, certain events pierce through the noise, demanding our attention. They shake us, they challenge our understanding of stability, and they remind us of the fragility of peace. Tonight we're going to look at 5 such stories that are unfolding right now, across the globe. Here are the most shocking headlines dominating international news right now. From the corridors of power to the streets where ordinary people are caught in the crossfire, we're seeing profound shifts and heartbreaking tragedies. These stories involve sudden political upheavals, violent tragedies, and escalating crises that have captured global attention. We'll travel from Africa, where a president has reportedly fled his palace on foot, to Europe, where a brazen attack has left a nation in mourning. We'll examine the delicate, almost shattered peace in the Middle East and the rising tensions in the Caribbean. And we will look at a humanitarian disaster that is unfolding, largely unseen, where children are paying the highest price for the failures of adults. Each of these headlines tells a story of conflict, loss, and the desperate search for resolution. They are not just news items, they are moments that will define the political and social landscape for years to come. Understanding them is crucial to understanding the world we live in today. Prioritizing recency and shock value, let's dive in. Our first story takes us to the island nation of Madagascar, a place of incredible biodiversity now facing incredible political turmoil. Reports emerging from the capital, Antananarivo, are both stunning and chaotic. President Andry Rajoelina has reportedly fled the presidential palace on foot. Imagine that. For a moment, the leader of a nation abandoning the symbols of his power, escaping into the streets as his government collapses around him. This isn't a quiet resignation, it's a dramatic, desperate flight for survival as the military moves to seize control of the state. The situation is incredibly fluid, with conflicting reports about his current whereabouts, but the message is clear: power has crumbled. What makes this upheaval so significant is who is driving it. This is not a traditional military coup, at least not in its origins. This is a youth-led revolt. For weeks, young Malagasy citizens, frustrated with rampant corruption, economic stagnation, and what they see as a stolen future, have been organizing, protesting, and demanding change. They utilize social media to coordinate demonstrations that grew from small gatherings into a massive, unstoppable movement that overwhelmed state security forces. The military's decision to seize power appears to be a reaction to this popular uprising, an attempt to restore order, but whose order remains the critical question. The implications extend far beyond Madagascar's borders. The African Union is watching with deep concern, as are international partners. A destabilized Madagascar could disrupt crucial shipping lanes in the Indian Ocean and create a power vacuum that could be exploited by other regional actors. For the people of Madagascar, this moment is one of both hope and immense uncertainty. They have toppled a leader, but what comes next? Will the military cede power to a civilian government, or will one form of autocratic rule simply be replaced by another? The world is watching to see if this youth-led cry for democracy will be answered or silenced. We now turn to Italy, a country synonymous with history, art and culture, but today, it is a nation in shock and mourning. Near the historic city of Verona, a scene of brutal violence has unfolded in broad daylight. A patrol vehicle belonging to the Carabinieri, Italy's elite national police force, was targeted by a powerful explosion. 3 officers were killed instantly, their lives extinguished in a moment of calculated terror. Another 13 people, including fellow officers and civilians who happened to be nearby, were injured in the blast. The aftermath is a scene of devastation: a mangled police vehicle, shattered glass, and the frantic work of first responders. This was not a random act of violence. The targeting of the Carabinieri, a force that is both a military police and a gendarmerie, points to a deliberate and audacious challenge to the Italian state itself. They are often on the front lines of combating organized crime and terrorism, making them a symbolic and strategic target. The brazenness of the attack, carried out during the day on a public road, is designed to send a message of fear and to demonstrate that nowhere is safe, and no one is beyond reach. It's an attack on the very fabric of law and order in the country. Investigators are now working around the clock, pursuing 2 primary lines of inquiry. The first is organized crime. Northern Italy has seen a growing infiltration by powerful mafia groups like the 'Ndrangheta, and this attack could be a violent message, a form of retaliation for recent crackdowns, or a warning against future police actions. The other possibility is terrorism, either domestic or international. Italy has a history of political violence, and authorities are not ruling out extremist groups. For the Italian people, this is a chilling echo of darker times, a reminder that the specter of violence is never truly gone. The nation waits, holding its breath for answers. In the Middle East, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas hangs by the thinnest of threads. The guns have fallen silent for now, but the anguish is as loud as ever. A core component of the truce agreement was the return of the bodies of hostages who died in captivity. This week, that grim process began. But the images are gut-wrenching. The remains were not simply returned, they were delivered in coffins, a stark formal acknowledgement of death that has extinguished the last glimmers of hope for so many families. For these families, the end of a horrific waiting game is not relief, but the beginning of a lifetime of grief. The delivery of the coffins has become a new and painful flashpoint. Israeli officials are publicly accusing Hamas of slow-walking the process, of deliberately prolonging the agony of the families as a form of psychological pressure. They are demanding a faster, more transparent return of all known deceased hostages. These accusations are poisoning the already fragile atmosphere of the ceasefire. Every day that passes without a resolution to this issue increases the risk of a return to open conflict. The quiet is precarious, a temporary pause in a war that feels anything but over. Behind the scenes, the diplomatic scramble continues. Indirect talks, mediated by countries like Egypt and Qatar, are ongoing. The discussions are not about peace in the grand sense, but about managing the crisis. They focus on the mechanics of the ceasefire, the exchange of remaining prisoners and hostages, and the flow of humanitarian aid into a devastated Gaza. But with each public accusation and each painful image of a coffin being carried across the border, the trust required for even these limited talks erodes. The families are caught in the middle, their personal tragedies playing out on a global stage, pawns in a brutal geopolitical chess match. Tensions between the United States and Venezuela have escalated dramatically following a deadly confrontation in the Caribbean Sea. A United States Coast Guard vessel, engaged in a counter-narcotics operation, intercepted a Venezuelan boat suspected of smuggling drugs. According to the Pentagon, the Venezuelan vessel took hostile and evasive action, leading to a raid that resulted in the deaths of 6 Venezuelan nationals. The United States government is framing this as a necessary law enforcement action against transnational criminal organizations, but in Caracas, the narrative is entirely different. The Venezuelan government is calling it an act of aggression, a violation of their sovereignty, and an extrajudicial killing of its citizens. This incident does not happen in a vacuum. It comes at a time of extreme political friction. Here in the United States, a protracted government shutdown is paralyzing federal agencies and fueling political division. This raid, whether justified or not, risks being seen as a foreign policy distraction. For Venezuela, it's another chapter in what they describe as a long history of American interventionism. The rhetoric from both sides is intensifying, with each government accusing the other of provocation. This single, violent encounter at sea has the potential to spiral into a much larger diplomatic or even military crisis between the two nations. Adding a layer of profound irony to this story is the timing. Just last week, the Nobel Committee awarded the Peace Prize to a group of journalists and activists working to expose corruption and human rights abuses within Venezuela. It was a moment that highlighted the struggle for freedom and transparency. Now, that moment is overshadowed by an incident that brings the threat of open conflict to the forefront. It underscores the dangerous paradox of the region. While some are being honored for seeking peace, the actions of governments are pushing them closer to war. The path of de-escalation is unclear, and the waters of the Caribbean have seldom felt more dangerous. Finally, we go to Haiti, where a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions is unfolding, largely away from the world's gaze. A new report from UNICEF paints a devastating picture. The number of children displaced by gang violence has doubled in just the last 5 months. Think about that. The number has. We are now talking about 680,000 children forced from their homes. These are not just numbers on a page. They are children who have lost everything. Their homes, their schools, their sense of safety. They are living in makeshift camps, on the streets, or crowded into the homes of relatives, constantly vulnerable to violence, malnutrition, and disease. The scale of this crisis is almost impossible to comprehend. The violence is described by aid workers on the ground as unprecedented. Armed gangs control vast swathes of the capital, Port-au-Prince and beyond, waging war against each other and against the population itself. They use sexual violence as a weapon, recruit children into their ranks, and block access to essential services. The situation has become so perilous that major aid organizations, like Doctors Without Borders, have been forced to close emergency medical centers because they can no longer guarantee the safety of their staff or their patients. When the helpers have to flee, you know the situation is catastrophic. This is a complete collapse of society. For these 680,000 children, the trauma is profound and perhaps irreversible. They are a generation at risk of being completely lost, uneducated, unhealthy, and deeply scarred by the violence they have witnessed and endured. The international community has been slow to respond, hampered by the security situation and political deadlock, but the price of inaction is being paid by Haiti's most vulnerable. This is not just a Haitian crisis, it is a crisis of our shared humanity. The question is, will the world look away, or will it finally act to save this lost generation? As we've seen tonight, from the political earthquake in Madagascar to the humanitarian nightmare in Haiti, these are not isolated incidents. They are interconnected pieces of a complex and challenging global puzzle. These stories reflect a world on edge, with violence, power shifts, and humanitarian crises colliding. They show us how quickly stability can unravel, how fragile peace can be, and how the most vulnerable, children, families, civilians, are so often the ones who bear the heaviest burden. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of it all, but being informed is the first step toward engagement and, ultimately, toward change. This has been just a snapshot, a brief look at some of the most urgent stories of the moment. Each one has layers of complexity and history that we couldn't possibly cover in our short time together. I encourage you to dig deeper, to read more, and to form your own informed opinions. For deeper dives, check sources like CNN, Al Jazeera, or AP News. They have journalists on the ground and provide comprehensive ongoing coverage that is essential for a full understanding of these events. Don't just take my word for it. Seek out a variety of perspectives. The world does not stand still. By tomorrow, there will be new developments, new challenges, and new headlines. The narratives we've discussed will continue to evolve, and new stories will demand our attention. Staying aware is not just a passive activity, it's an active responsibility in a democratic society. Thank you for joining me tonight. News evolves quickly. Stay vigilant.